Hello there, boos and ghouls. It is once again October, which means it is my favorite season of the year. Halloween series 2024! Yay! So, this year, for Halloween, I'm doing black horror, or horror noir, as it's sometimes called. In this case, I'm doing films, but this could be films, literature, um, media of any kind that focuses on the experience of Black people. This may be African, this may be Afro-Caribbean, this may be African-American, and indeed the films that I'm going to be talking about for this series are all African-American driven films. Typically African-American majority, if not entire casts, often directed, written, whatever it is, produced by African Americans. And black horror tends to, though doesn't exclusively, tends to focus a lot on elements of race, racism, and the violence inherent in a racially hierarchized society. So in this video, we're going to talk about Spencer Williams's film, The Blood of Jesus. Calling this a horror movie slightly stretches the definition of horror. It's not an especially scary movie, I think, especially from the perspective of 2024, and especially from a not deeply Christian perspective. It's definitely a supernatural sort of fantasy-driven film. The devil shows up. He's cool. Just look at this guy. Look at that fucking devil costume. And tell me that this guy is not awesome. Played by James B. Jones is Satan. So, the other thing that's weird about this movie, it's got about a 56-minute runtime. About 6 minutes of that is dialogue. The other 50 or so minutes is primarily devoted to music. Mostly spirituals, tons and tons and tons of spirituals and hymns and things like this, and then jazz. So, I get the sense that this film was really written kind of with silent film in mind. The way that the actors sort of use their faces, the way we focus on faces as though they're conveying a lot of emotion, and they are. Like, I'm not saying that dismissively, but like, that's very much a sort of silent film trope. And as you get into the era of talkies, of the movies that we all know today, which have sound, dialogue becomes much more important, whereas conveying a lot of nuanced information through facial expressions and long close-ups, long lingering shots on people's faces, you don't have to do that to convey conflict as much. But this film very much does, so it feels like kind of a throwback to the silent film era, even though it is a film with sound. So, what happens in The Blood of Jesus? Well, this is primarily the story of Sister Martha Ann Jackson. And we open with her and a bunch of other people being baptized. Her husband, Raz Jackson, played by Spencer Williams, who's amazing, right? I talked about Spencer Williams in my video about Son of Ingagi. He was my absolute favorite character in that movie. An amazing performance. He is really, really good here. But here he's a much more serious character. In Son of Ingagi, he was very much a sort of comic relief, bumbling type figure. Here he is a much more serious and sad, for much of the movie, character. So Martha has gone out. She's gotten baptized. Raz has not gone with her, either to be baptized himself or to support her as she is being baptized. He has gone hunting, or poaching, more accurately. Raz is not part of the church. Sister Jenkins, who's one of the sort of leading church ladies, wants to try and bring Raz back, but he's not that keen. It doesn't seem necessarily that any particular thing happened that drove him away from the church. He isn't that interested. But Martha is. So Martha comes home, and Raz is cleaning his gun, the gun that he has just been out poaching with. And he goes to set it down, it slips, and it accidentally shoots Martha. She is severely injured, and basically it's unclear that she's going to survive, and the implication is that she does actually die because Sister Jenkins pulls the sheet over her head at one point after a long period of the church people just standing alongside the bed, basically just singing spirituals and praying. And when I say a long period, I mean this is a 56-minute runtime movie. It's probably about 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes of just them singing hymns and praying. That's a substantial chunk of this film just for that bit. So there's that element of it. So the other thing that suggests that Martha has actually died is that she is visited by an angel. And Martha's ghost seems to rise up out of the bed, who go with the angel. The angel takes her down to this sort of, I don't know, limbo type area. So it's this sort of field, and she's basically like, basically what she describes is essentially sort of bodhisattvas, except this is Southern Christianity and not Buddhism. But they see this group of people just sort of meandering sadly in this field, and the angel explains that these are people who have come to teach righteousness and been shunned by the world. And they wander in despair over the continued existence of wickedness, of greed, of sinfulness, etc. in the world. And it's actually a really, really good scene. It's a really, really philosophically and theologically interesting scene. Then the angel takes Martha a little bit further and basically says, here's a crossroads. If you go that direction toward the city, you will go to hell. If you go that direction toward heaven, you will have life. And so, and then the angel's like, I'm out. Make your decision. Get to stepping. Satan, again, totally awesome. He has been watching this whole interaction from behind a tree, and so he gets his guy, Judas Green. He's a very sort of slick, cool for the 1940s suit-wearing dude, and he sends Judas Green down to intercept Martha and basically be like, hey, I've got this beautiful dress and these awesome shoes. If you want to go to that cool-looking city over there, you're going to need to look pretty fancy. These are totally free. Don't even worry. There is no catch whatsoever. And the angel is like, hey, don't give in to vanity. And Martha's like, that's a cool dress. I am going to take that. So Judas Green takes Martha to the city, where they go to a dance club, jazz club thing. The city is really the home of jazz in this film, whereas the rural, small town area is the home of gospel music. In the city, Judas Green goes to Rufus Brown, this other sort of slick city businessman person, and Rufus is like, "Hey, Martha Ann Jackson, I can offer you a job where you will make a lot of money and not have to work very hard." Martha is like, "That sounds amazing. Sign me right up." Little does she realize that it's a brothel. Uh-oh. So now she actually is basically enslaved is not necessarily quite the right word, but it's also not quite the wrong word. She is basically trapped in this brothel in a kind of debt slavery because Rufus tells her that he gave Judas $30, 30 pieces of silver, $30, there you go, that he gave Judas $30 for the dress and shoes that she's wearing. So she has to entertain clients to pay him back this money. Martha is not keen on this. She prays, and the angel shows up and is basically like, "Yeah, just leave. Just fucking run. Go out of here. Don't even worry about it." So Martha leaves, but one of the other women working in this establishment has stolen the wallet of a customer. The customers angrily confront Rufus Brown, and he's like, "What? Oh, hey, gosh, sorry." So they take off. They see Martha fleeing. They assume that she is the woman who stole the wallet, and so they pursue her. Martha, there's a fairly lengthy chase scene where Martha is just running flat out, and this group of disgruntled brothel patrons are running after her. And finally, she comes to this, I guess, a different crossroads or the same crossroads. It's not 100% clear. There's a sign. One side says "to hell," the other side says "to Zion." But what's super cool about this crossroads is that Satan is there, just sitting behind the wheel of a flatbed car with a jazz band on it, and just the group of people are gathered around listening to this awesome devil jazz. It is actually a super badass scene that I completely love. I know that Satan is the bad guy and we're not supposed to be rooting for him, but that's pretty fucking awesome. Satan sees Martha. He gets out of the truck to go confront her and get her soul, whatever it is his plan is. And he gets over toward her, and the road sign with "to hell," "to Zion," and the crosspiece turns into a crucifix with Jesus on it. And Jesus, or God, or whoever is like, "Get thee behind me, Satan. The ground you're standing on is holy." And so Satan runs off, gets back in his truck, takes off driving with the jazz band. Everybody starts chasing him. And then basically a choir, presumably of angels, appears, and Martha is just like laying on the ground underneath this road sign turned crucifix, and the blood of Jesus drips onto her face, symbolically saving her soul. She wakes back up in her own room. She calls Raz over, and she's like, "Why did they stop singing? I love the church singing." So Raz goes and gets Sister Jenkins and all the church people. They come back in. They have another spiritual, and nobody, not Raz, not Sister Jenkins, nobody except this one guy who comes in a little bit late and is like, and then just like topples over in a faint. Nobody at all seems concerned. that Martha Ann Jackson had died and is now back alive listening to them singing. Nobody seems bothered. Raz is just like, whatevs, that's great. I wanted Martha back, I got Martha back. Everything works out for me. Everything coming up Raz. Sister Jenkins is just like, that's probably a miracle. I'm not even going to worry about that. It's really only one guy who comes in and is shocked by this. So that's a very odd element to the ending, that everybody just sort of accepts her resurrection and is not at all worried about it. So what I think that one of the things I think that's really interesting about this film, and so the last thing I think I really want to comment on, so much of this film is driven by music. And of course, that's really, really important for African American culture, right? Historically, things like spirituals, hymns, gospel music, things like this, these were, of course, ways of comforting slaves, comforting enslaved people, with sort of the promise of redemption, promise of freedom, the promise of equality before God, etc., etc. And that sort of carried over into the post-slavery Jim Crow period. These became songs of comfort and central elements to African American Southern culture in particular. Jazz, of course, is an African American genre as well, invented by African Americans. The great jazz musicians have primarily been African American, but it has a complicated place in American culture, in African American culture, and in Southern culture. Because on the one hand, jazz is very empowering, it's very freeing, very liberating with its sort of breakup of traditional rhythms, of traditional sort of meter, things like this, the things that go into traditional music writing. Jazz breaks a lot of those traditions in favor of being more free form, more experimental, more flowing, etc. And so in that way, it is sort of tied to liberation, tied to freedom, tied to individual expression. On the other hand, jazz is also often associated with clubs, with the city, with fast living, with being sinful, etc., etc. It is one of these art forms, sort of like theater, interestingly enough, in the early modern period, where theaters were seen as these sort of dens of vice, and the religious people of the day really detested them. Jazz has had, I don't know that it has today, something of the same cultural cachet, right? It became associated with vice, with fast living, with loose morals, etc., etc. Metal is another one. Punk is another one, of these sort of arts that are associated with drinking too much, with having sex, with irreligiosity, if not atheism, with challenging social conventions, undermining norms, etc., etc. And it very much in this film feels like there is a stark dichotomy. The wholesome space of honestly rural poverty and suffering is associated with the spiritual, and the morally corrupting space of the city, the dance hall, the club, the brothel. These places are associated with jazz, as is Satan, whereas God, the angel, etc., is associated with the hymn. It's a very stark dichotomy, and it is kind of interesting to me that a film written by Spencer Williams, an African American with an entirely African American cast. This is a very much African American driven project. It is somewhat surprising to me that it takes such a negative perspective on jazz.